Yep.
Okay, I guess I'll start. So, who is the central figure of person-centered therapy, and what elements of his experiences growing up appear to have heavily influenced this approach to therapy? And as we know, it's Carl Rogers. And like Dr. Butler talked about and the textbook talked about, growing up as a fundamentalist Christian really influenced like how he viewed the world later in life and how he kind of rebelled against that. And I know that it talked about in the textbook that he went to China and
Yeah.
that was kind of like what changed everything.
Yeah.
Um, let's see, what else do I have? Sorry if I look down a lot. I'm looking at my notes. Yeah, and the text also said he was raised to be distant when socializing with others, and I think that he had this greater longing to like connect with people, and I think that is kind of why he got into the field that he did. And I think he just got this understanding and appreciation of humans and just why people are the way they are and just accepting them. So,
I wrote down a couple of things that aren't necessarily when he was growing up. There wasn't that much other than his rigid fundamentalist family and that they were the masters of repressive control. That was an interesting quote.
yes.
And that they really taught him to keep his distance from people. But some of the other stuff that I wrote was about him going to China because at the very end of the chapter, it said that he had like some Taoist principles, like the principle of non-action, and I thought that
Mhm.
was really interesting, and that may have come from his early years experience over there. And
Yes.
then also I wrote about Franklin D. Roosevelt, his social policies, optimism, and the idea of empowering individuals inspired Rogers. So
Mhm.
even though that wasn't necessarily from his childhood, I can just only imagine, I mean, what Great Depression started in like 29 and then Franklin Roosevelt became president in 33. So I
Yeah.
just can't even imagine how going through that and having that inspirational of a leader must have been really, really powerful.
Oh, yeah, totally.
Yeah. And then I
And
also
didn't,
wrote down about auto rank that Rankian principles, that the idea that the client is the central figure in therapy and to accept your own uniqueness and creative powers, that was really influential on him
oh,
too.
yeah. And didn't it say at the end of the book, like he was agnostic or something like that too?
Yeah, but then it said like he started talking more about mysticism and stuff. I think it said
Yeah.
very end of his life. It was pretty interesting.
Yeah, I think that's really cool. I love that.
Yeah. So number two, clients or person-centered therapy is non-directive. What are the theoretical reasons for why this approach is non-directive? And I said, according to our textbook, contemporary person-centered therapy is sometimes directive, but classical PCT is not. Rogers appears to have noticed when he first applied directive therapy to clients that it didn't work. So the question says, why is this approach non-directive? And I think it wasn't until he actually tried and he felt it wasn't working that he thought non-directive would be better. After studying Otto Rank, he took on the ideas that therapy should be non-directive because in this way you can help clients to access their own power to heal themselves. Theoretically, Rogers learned that his clients were the best teachers and that they could often eventually articulate insights into their own life that were even more sound than Rogers. He believed that the client knows what hurts, and if you provide a non judgmental, safe space, that they will lead you there. It also helps a client to not develop ambivalence towards change if they feel that they are in control of the direction of the therapy.
Yeah. I mean, you kind of hit everything. And I think it's interesting that he kind of sees this power within people. I really like that. And that his clients are the experts on themselves. And I really appreciate that he has that outlook. And yeah, basically, I put the same kind of stuff, except I would say that it's non-directive because you're supposed to listen and empathize and um, rather than give advice or kind of have leading questions or something like that. Um, And like you said, the client is the teacher rather than the therapist being the teacher. So,
Yeah. I always think about, I think probably none of us in this class want to be true Rogerians, but I think, the positives to this therapy. And like, I remember I said to my husband once, let's buy a Volkswagen Passat wagon because we had a baby and I was like, we could stick our stroller in it. And he just like completely did dismiss the idea. But then like, a year later or 2 years later, it became his idea. And then when it was his idea, then he was like, this is the coolest car ever. And so I think, with these Rogerian principles, it is true. Like if you come to the insight on your own, or if you feel like it's your own idea, it
yeah,
can be a lot more powerful, I think.
yeah, for sure. And just something personal, like I'm in therapy, so I think that my therapist kind of takes on some of these like concepts because sometimes she'll be like, well, you know yourself best, so you tell me. So
Ooh, she sounds good.
she is good. She's really good. It's kind of funny that
Yeah.
when I was reading about that, that's what I thought of. So,
Mhm.
okay, number three, in order to develop mental health, it is essential for people to develop congruence between what this congruence is not with the therapist, but within themselves. How does one go about developing this congruence? And this was kind of a difficult concept for me, the whole congruence thing, because it applies in different areas as far as I could understand from the reading. So I put there needs to be congruence between the self and the organism, and this is done through growth, which includes becoming more self-aware and self-accepting. And this is through unconditional positive regard from the therapist and the therapist's own congruence. I don't know if I hit that right because this is a concept that was hard for me for some reason.
I think because the what Dr. Butler stressed, and I think I was the one that asked him this because I was confused about it. The real self is also known as the whole organismic self. The ideal self is, who you think you should be based on
Right.
messages received from your family, culture, and society. The ideal self comes from internalizing values from others, and if there's incongruence between those values and our real self, then we develop discomfort, and this inner conflict is what can lead to psychopathology. To develop congruence, we must be genuine and authentic. Another way to put this is we need to accept and live in our real self, or else actualize the things that we want in the ideal self so that they become a part of the real self. And Dr. Butler talked about that some more on Wednesday, that it could
Yeah.
go either way, right? Like if you want to be more towards the ideal self, you can go that way. Or if you really feel that that's unattainable, then you have got to go the other way. You have got to become
Yeah.
happy with who you actually are instead of trying to actualize things that you can't.
Yeah. I thought it was interesting that it's it sounded a lot like act therapy to me, and I know that he brought that up. So I have more awareness of like the newer act stuff rather than some of this Rogerian stuff. So I had a hard time like thinking about it in that way, if that makes sense.
Yep. Yep.
Oh,
I thought it was interesting that you knew that. I don't know anything about like the really contemporary theories and
yeah.
stuff. I should look forward and see if are we going to cover act therapy in this book?
I don't know if we are or not. I haven't looked. But there's a lot of information out there on it for sure.
Number 4, in person-centered therapy, it is essential for the therapist to be congruent. We didn't just do that one, did we? No.
They're kind of the same.
Oh, okay. How does the therapist express congruence? Why is it difficult? And is it possible to be congruent in ways that are not therapeutic? And I said the therapist needs to express both their positive as well as their negative feelings while with the client, or else their internal self is not matching the self that the client is able to see. Rogers said, when I'm in therapy, I am quite happy for the client to see right through me. In a way, this is modeling for the client, because Rogers believed that the more congruent the therapist, the more congruent the client will eventually be able to be. This is difficult to do because the therapist has to actually feel and be non-judgmental in order to be congruent and non-judgmental towards the client. PCT requires that the therapist accept and respect the client. And in order to be congruent, the therapist needs to actually feel this, not just act this way. This requires that therapists do a lot of work on their own biases before engaging in PCT. It is certainly possible to be congruent in ways that are not therapeutic. For instance, if you were to start having romantic feelings for your client, this would not be appropriate or a good idea. But to
Yeah.
be congruent, those feelings might start showing on the outside. And let's see. Oh, and another example is negative feelings that you're having towards your client can be expressed congruently, but this is probably not therapeutic for your client either. It might actually shut the client down.
Yeah, for sure. I like that you brought up the romantic one because I think that one is so often overlooked when it shouldn't be.
Yeah.
So I appreciate that, that you brought that up. I kind of said a lot of the same things, like the therapist needs to express congruence by being their authentic self, whether that's positive or negative. And I put it may be non-therapeutic because this may produce hurt feelings within the client. Like if you were to be congruent with your negative feelings, that could really harm the therapeutic alliance in the relationship.
Mm-hmm.
And I also said timing was super important because if you haven't formulated that therapeutic alliance yet and you are acting congruently, like it may go very wrong depending on the timing. And then I also said it's also difficult because some situations may not elicit unconditional positive regard from the therapist. And kind of like we were talking about in class, like if you have a client that is talking about maybe something deviant or something that doesn't align with your own values, like it's actually really hard to be truly like yourself in that situation. So
Yeah.
yeah, those are some of the things that I put down.
Yeah. I listened to the rest of the therapy with Gloria, and
I haven't
it's
done it yet.
oh man, it is really interesting. He violates a lot of his own principles, I feel. Like towards the end of that session, she says, you feel like the father I never had. And he says, well, you seem to me like you would be a really great daughter. And so it's like he says you're not supposed to become a love object,
Right.
but totally like affirms and mirrors back. And I'm sure he's being congruent. I'm sure he really felt this way about Gloria. And so
Mhm.
it's interesting because I think if anybody wanted to practice this, they have to understand that just how difficult it is and that you just can't do it all the time. Even Rogers couldn't.
Yeah. Yeah. But I'm excited to watch the rest of that because I haven't done it yet. I was going to do it after this. So
It really has to be taken in context with the time, and how distressing it must have been for her
yeah.
to be divorced and, be doing things that, especially at the time, were just not acceptable. So,
Yes. That's what I was thinking a lot about. And maybe that's like my taking of like feminist theory and stuff like that because at the time that was not accepted. But nowadays it's like, why not, you know?
yeah. Yeah. And the things that she's saying would not even be controversial today. Like when she says,
Yeah.
have these desires and I have these feelings and I've
Yeah.
been having men over.
Right. Yeah. That's what I was thinking too.
Yeah.
Okay.
Um,
Motivational interviewing is a contemporary application of PCT. In what ways does it stay true to Rogers' principles, and in what ways does it depart? What are the benefits and detriments of this departure from Rogers' core ideas? So I put motivational interviewing tries to change certain behaviors, while Rogerian PCT is more focused on becoming congruent with your organism and yourself. MI also teaches the client, while Rogerian PCT includes the client teaching the therapist. This can be beneficial for those who are looking for a therapist who is more directing in their approach, kind of like what Gloria was asking for. However, this can be a detriment for those who don't want to be so directed. And personally, I have a hard time imagining somebody like that. But and one of the ways that the two are similar is the acceptance of the client and all that they are. This can be challenging for the therapist if they have any aversive feeling towards the client, but it may be beneficial for the client to feel safe, accepted, and seen.
Yeah, well put. I said, consistent with Rogers, in MI, therapists do not interpret, confront, or pressure the clients in any way. Empathy for the client is also paramount in both techniques. In both techniques, the therapist is not the expert, the client is, but MI differs in that the primary target is client ambivalence. And this is different than Rogers' principles of not having a target so that the clients can truly lead the way. Therapists use specific techniques in MI to help ambivalence, which is different. Change talk helps the client change their behavior by focusing on their desire and motivations to change. One benefit of this is it can help the therapist to have a structured path to follow in therapy. Boy, like as us as beginning therapists someday, that I can't imagine going straight into Rogerian therapy and
Right,
not direction would be like, ah.
right.
One detriment is that it is very difficult to plant the seed of change talk and have the client feel that it is not being pushed onto them in any way. Because if they feel pushed, they can feel manipulated and then naturally they will push back.
Yes, for sure. Yeah, I forgot about the change talk part of that. Yeah.
Because
A lot,
that really can be education, right? Like in Rogers, you're going out of your way to not educate the client, but in MI, when you're reflecting the change talk back to them, you can like educate them while you're doing it.
yeah, exactly. Yeah. It's interesting stuff because this is Rogerian stuff is something I've never really talked about before in any of my other classes. So I think I had a hard time with this one this week.
Yeah. I've when it's been brought up in my other classes, I felt like it's almost been making fun of Rogers a little bit, like,
Mhm.
unconditional positive regard, ha ha ha.
Yeah,
Like basically that none of us are um truly able to do that with somebody.
right. Yeah.
Is it in this textbook that it says the only people that are not weird are the people that you don't know very well?
I think so. Yeah.
Yeah, that
And
kind of
it's true.
yeah, like as you went through Rogerian therapy and you got to know somebody better, I don't know if that would make it easier. Seeing how truly weird all of us are, would that make it easier for you to have unconditional positive regard or harder? I'm not sure.
Right?
Yeah.
Yeah. We're all weird. That's for sure.
Should I stop recording this?
Yeah.
I think we covered everything.
I think we did too.